Tonight, let us wander to a land where the Caucasus rise like a wall against the winds, and vineyards thread their green fingers along riverbanks as old as memory. In the hush, before sleep, picture Georgia Velo, cradled between mountains and sea, where shepherds still sing to wandering flocks, and church bells climb the cold air like silver ladders. The stones here, remember, footfall after footfall, century after century. Kings and monks and merchants wore paths that glint faintly in moonlight, as if history itself were a river running underground. A grandmother lifts a clay Cuivre lid and breathes the tart perfume of wine that has learned patience in the dark. A boy traces the honey-veined frescoes on a chapel wall and asks why every saint has eyes that see through time. A trader closes his stall, tucks silk into cedar chests, and listens for the distant creak of caravan leather. A sound like an old door that still swings true. Peace has a sound here, so does danger. They have taken turns, like night and morning. Once, riders came over the passes with thunder in their hooves. Once, caravans set their lamps along the silk roads, and the lamps spoke to each other like stars. Here stood kingdoms that were not meant to last, and yet they did, again and again, by bending without breaking, by learning how to place stone upon stone until faith could lean its full weight on an arch and not fall. If you listen carefully, you will hear the alphabet itself, 20-something letters flowing like vines, knotted with curls and soft corners, as if the written word was taught to grow rather than to march. You will hear the river Mount Kavari talking to Tbilisi in a language of steam and bridges. You will hear the mountains teaching endurance, and the Black Sea teaching departure and return. Lay down your worries now. We will walk softly. We will keep company with kings and farmers, queens and masons, poets and pilgrims. And when we are done, we will leave them as we found them in the slow candlelight of history, still speaking in low voices, still awake while we drift into sleep. Mountains are patient teachers. They teach names first, not the ones in books, but the ones your breath learns when the air thins and every step has weight. Georgia's first lessons begin among these slopes, where trails are tight as thoughts, and every turn gives you a new horizon. The Svan towers rise like punctuation marks across valleys, pauses of stone asking travelers to slow down. In their shadows, families once stored grain and secrets, and when storms grumbled, the towers stood with the stubborn elegance of old promises. To understand a people, begin with how they say hello to the land. The Georgians greet with terraces and paths, with orchards stitched between rock and water, apple and plum, grape and mulberry. Each tree is a quiet bargain with the future. The mountain passes are less doors than sentences. To pass them is to read the grammar of survival. On one slope, a shepherd watches cloud shadows leap like goats. On another, a mason wraps a stone with the back of his chisel, listens, nods, and sets it where it fits, with a tap that sounds like yes. Close your eyes and hear the alphabets long before ink, the percussion of hammer on stone, the rustle of cloth, the near-silent footfall of felted boots. Later, letters will curve and loop asomtavruli, nuskuri, mukedruli, scripts like braided river channels, each feeding the same sea of meaning. But first, there is the earth itself, and the human wish to make a home sturdy enough to resist both wind and forgetfulness. In the days when maps were rumors, travelers stitched Georgia into their stories with silks and spices. Small coins and large exaggerations. They carried tales of hot springs with the patience to heal, of bread that came from clay ovens as if from a warm cave in the world's body, of wine born underground, the cuvevri, egg-shaped and earthen, taught time to slow down. Grapes surrendered their sweetness, not to hurry, but to season, and what emerged was a drink with the taste of copper sunrises and cool cellars. Something that taught a person to sit longer, to talk kinder, to remember deeper. Villages learned to look upward and inward at once. Upward to the high slopes, where weather is both neighbor and judge. Inward to courtyards, where a walnut tree keeps counsel with a bench, and evenings are stitched together by stories. Hospitality was not a performance, but a reflex, a table lengthened, bread broken, a ladle dipped again. A guest, they say, is sent by God. Perhaps that is why doors here swing with practice. When winter presses close, songs fatten the air. Polyphony 3. Sometimes more. Voices braiding without a single thread pulling tight. It is music with the confidence to let space show. A bass hum like hearth coals. A mid-voice that leans like a shoulder. A high line that skims the roof beam and escapes into weather. Each line yields and holds. Yields and holds the same lesson the mountains give. There is faith. 2. Learned not from thunder, but from persistence. Stone churches collect centuries like rainwater in a cistern, drip by drip, until the vessel is full. Their frescoes fade not into silence, but into a softer register. A saint's raised hand still blesses. You simply have to stand closer and wait for your eyes to dark adapt. Pilgrims come, so do children at play. Their laughter like birds trying on new directions. If history is a road, Georgia lies at the place where roads agree to share the same dust. Here, traders have haggled, soldiers have halted, scribes have paused to wet their pens. The land learned to tell welcome and warning with the same tools, arches and gates, towers and walls. Some arrivals were gentle, others came armored. A people that lives under such weather learns balance, a soft word when it helps, a firm wall when it must. The mountains taught that, too, and so a name took root. Not the exonym flung from foreign tongues, but the name whispered between hearth and hillside, Sakartvelo, the place of the Kartvelians, the home gathered by hands that knew both quarry and plough. Names are promises. This one promised that even as rulers changed and banners shifted their colors in the wind, the work of mornings would continue, bread to bake, flocks to lead, vines to tend, children to teach how to listen to stone. Pause here. Breathe with the ridgelines. In the next turn of the path, we will find kings and queens who learned from these slopes how to lift a kingdom without making it brittle, how to win by outlasting, and how, when the time came, to lay down the sword and pick up the trowel again. Before the century could decide its temper, a queen stepped forward with the patience of a mason and the reach of a river. Tamar. Her name moves softly through Georgian evenings, borne along by tea steam and grape leaves, easy in the mouth, firm in the memory. The mountains had already taught endurance. Tamar would teach radiance how to throw light across valleys without burning them. She was crowned not once but twice. as if the land needed a second yes. The court murmured. Some frowned the way shutters do in a sudden wind. A woman to rule the question was old. The answer would be lived, not argued. She began, as mountains begin, by holding. She listened, weighed, and gathered. Counselors who expected thunder found weather more complicated fog that makes the world smaller until it grows precise, then sun that shows every line of the terrain. She moved carefully where pride asked for speed. She placed people as she might place stones where they bore weight without cracking. Her reign did not come from conquest alone. Yes, the banners advanced, and borders breathed outward, but the more enduring work lay in the spaces that filled behind those banners, roads kept passable, markets that trusted tomorrow, monasteries whose scriptoria grew gardens of ink. Tamar seemed to understand that true strength is a kind of silence one you can hear in the night when caravans sleep. Travelers who arrived in her Georgia wrote about a country where cities wore their prosperity without swagger. Tbilisi, Kutaisi. Arni's echoes names like steps in a long corridor. Merchants praised low taxes more than high towers. Scholars praised safety more than spectacle. Soldiers praised the feeling of returning to fields they remembered. There are victories that make noise, and there are victories that arrive like spring. Inevitable and green, art blossomed in the shade of this order. Stonecutters borrowed patience from winter and turned it into filigree that held up churches as easily as a hand holds a bird. Fresco painters listened to the hush inside pigment until saints leaned out with human gravity, eyes steady, mouths quiet, hands that understood both blessing and burden. In the scriptoria, letters grew confident, their loops like swans learning the lake. Poetry learned to pour like wine measured, fragrant, dark enough to invite more light. It is tempting to measure a reign by battles won, but tonight we choose a gentler yardstick. How many shutters opened each morning? How many ovens kept their promises? How many mothers could count on the same streets at dusk that they knew at dawn? Under Tamar, the answer was enough, and more than enough. The realm felt held. Of course there were storms, the kind that test roof beams and resolve. A marriage to place a bridge between power blocks, a break when the bridge led only to eddies, new alliances sewn like patches that, surprisingly, made the cloak stronger. Enemies tested borders, allies tested patience. Through it all, the Queen practiced a politics of breath in hold, out hold, decisions set like stones, each aligned with the slope, each guiding the water where it needed to go. And then there was faith, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that keeps the lamp trimmed. Foundations sank into earth, arches rose in quiet arcs, donations were recorded without trumpet, and monks added the Queen's name to lists that would be sung long after courtiers forgot the shape of their own ambitions. Building is a form of prayer. Tamar's age prayed in stone. Listen, there is a procession rolling through a valley at dusk, a sway of standards. The clink of bridles, footfalls softened by dust. Villagers gather at fences. Some bow, others simply stare with the practical curiosity of people who must milk in the morning. The Queen lifts a hand. The valley holds its breath and then releases it. Gently. Behind her ride officers who will one day retire to vineyards, and scribes who smell faintly of cedar chests and lamp oil. In their saddlebags are letters that will become law and poems that will remember the color of this evening. What remains when a reign ends? Roads, bridges, a habit of order. The kind of memory that lives in people's wrists, how they cut bread, how they tie a rope, how they leave a gate for a neighbor. After Tamar, Georgia had more of these, even centuries later. When hard weather returned, villagers could still point to an arch and say, "This was set in the Queen's day," and the sentence would sound like a lullaby. There is a kind of greatness that does not jolt sleep, but deepens it. Tamar's was such greatness. She did not erase worry, she taught it manners. When night comes, and the wind slides down the ravines, you can still hear her rain in the steadiness of door latches and the way rooftops shed rain. Trade is a kind of weather arriving, passing, returning, always reshaping the air people breathe. In Georgia, the roads were not merely paths between markets, they were arteries that taught the land to feel faraway pulses. Caravans came from east and west, leading shadows shaped like baileys, bells, and patience. Their footsteps stitched the Caucasus to deserts and seas. Their stories traveled ahead of them like dawn traveling ahead of the sun. On one morning, mist lies low along the Malkvari. A caravan noses into the city like a careful animal packs saddles. Jars swaddled in rope, lacquered chests that smell faintly of pepper and camphor. A boy grips his mother's sleeve as men from distant coasts slide bright cloth over a stall beam. And something like the idea of summer spills into the street. Another day. Salt caravans from the flats arrive crisp and silent. A glittering cargo that remembers oceans with every grain. Trade teaches people to accept the miracle of difference, a nut from a tree you have never seen, a dye that turns cloth the color of ripe plums at sunset, a story shaped by a wind your neighbors have never named. The city learns a rhythm. Dawn is for sweeping thresholds, boiling porridge, counting coins by ear. Noon is for bargaining, laughter, and the scrape of spoon against stew pot. Evening is for tallying with the slow satisfaction of a ledger that holds not just profit and loss, but also the sturdy comfort of a day pressed flat and stored. Nights, when shutters pull in like folded wings. The city speaks more softly. A guard clears his throat on a gate tower, somewhere. An insomniac dog rearranges the street's silence. The scent of spice lingers above the sleeping roofs like a promise that tomorrow will once again arrive bearing news. To walk these markets is to hear the world's many clocks. A Greek fisherman haggles in a voice trained by waves. An Armenian jeweler holds a sapphire up to the ambiguous mercy of late afternoon light. A Persian scribe dips his reed, writes a name that curls as it blesses. Language is commerce's supple servant, and where tongues fail, hands find a grammar older than speech, palms up, palms down, fingers that measure, wrists that weigh. The Georgians have learned this grammar well. Hospitality is not a courtesy attached to the deal, it is the table on which the deal becomes human. Bread is offered before numbers, wine after, then a price that does not spill dignity. In the workshops, metal learns memory, copper yields, then resists, then yields again, and a bowl is born that remembers the maker's pulse. Textiles come down off the looms, tasting faintly of smoke and song. A shawl holds a pattern that looks like hills seen through rain. Books, too, move, some copied by candlelight in a monastery whose windows face the patient backs of grazing sheep, some inked in a city where lamps invent constellations every evening. The roads carry them outward and bring back in return not just goods, but arrangements of thought alembics. Astrolabes, legal forms, ways to calculate time against the stubborn irregularity of seasons. Trade, like the sea, has its tempers. There are years when war turns bridges into risks and maps into rumors. There are seasons when a faraway famine tightens prices here, as if an invisible hand had found all the belts in the market and pulled. Yet the habit of exchange proves resilient. You can close a gate for a day, for a year, but you cannot teach roads to forget the feet that made them. Even when danger prowls, two merchants will meet by a river ford and talk softly, not just of wares, but of weddings and weather, of saints and taxes, of the universal fact that children grow faster than sandals. There is a gentleness to prosperity that good rulers understand how to protect without flaunting. A stable coin, a fair count, a reasonable toll at a mountain pass where the wind can carry even a quiet complaint for miles. Tamar's order still shelters these transactions. And the cities put on weight like athletes who have learned endurance. It is not opulence that lasts, but the humble, repeatable miracle that tomorrow will likely be enough like today to make effort worthwhile. When moonlight finds the market after closing, the stalls look like skiffs tied up for the night. Somewhere, a sleeping cat is dreaming about a fish whose scales are coins. The city listens to its own breath. And in that steady sound, you can hear what trade leaves behind when the caravans leave a craft's muscle memory. A town's habit of fairness, a household's trust that bread will rise and that a stranger's footsteps at the gate may bring news rather than harm. Faith here does not shout, it abides. You meet it first as stone, a coolness under the palm when you lean against a church wall at noon, a curve of arch that teaches the eye how to rest. Georgia's monasteries do not dominate the landscape, they converse with it. They choose hilltops that look more like thought than like conquest. Promontories where wind is a liturgy and distance is a kind of page. A mason steps back from his work to see if the wall has found its sentence. A groove along an arch asks the shadow to write a second line that moves as the sun moves. Inside, frescoes tuned by centuries hold faces that have survived candles. Incense, hands that touch too often, wars that pass through like heavy weather. The saints look at you with a calm that is not indifference, but endurance. They have seen enough to be tender. Pilgrims come, some with staffs polished by miles, some with cars that still tick with engine heat. They come with reasons, illness, gratitude, worry that needs a place to be smaller. They light a thin taper whose flame seems almost embarrassed at first, then grows confident as it joins the other lights. Prayer becomes a population, silence, the city that shelters it. Monks move like commas through the hours, pausing, clarifying. Their gardens are tight arguments against despair beans climbing a line. Herbs, learning the local syntax of soil. A fig tree that takes seriously the command to bear fruit. Listen long enough and you will hear a different architecture rise polyphony. Voices build what stone has already suggested arches. Vaults, spaces that hold and enrich. The base anchors like bedrock. The middle lines weave like paths between vineyards. The treble floats where swallows practice their brief geometry above a cloister. No single voice tries to be everything. Instead, each gives what it has, receives what it lacks, and the result is a roof you can live under. This is theology by ear. This is architecture you can carry away inside your chest. Scriptoria keep their own weather. On a winter afternoon, the window gathers a faint frost, and the room smells faintly of lamp oil. Scraped parchment. Wool. A scribe shapes a letter that was already old when his grandfather was young, and the pen's whisper feels like a promise kept again. Margins may hold a small drawing, a fish, a vine, a mountain remembered from childhood. Prayer travels down the nib into meaning. No one hurries the ink. The page teaches the hand to breathe. The world beyond the hill is not always kind. Riders sometimes test gates. Taxis gather like storm clouds. A neighbor's quarrel becomes a boarder's age. Yet the monasteries practice a stubborn hospitality that turns fear into smaller portions. A traveler is given hot soup, a dry cloak, a place near the stove where boots can forget water. A book is open not to boast, but to share a word that has held up under many winters. The measure of faith is not just what it believes, but what it shelters. Calmly, when the wind shifts. In town, a wedding unscrolls with the same good manners as a psalm. Bread is broken, wine passed. Elders smile at jokes they have heard since they were young and will hear again at the christening that follows in its season. The church door swings between inside and out, like a chest breathing. At dusk, bells find the ears. They seek a widow watering the basil, a child turning a found feather into a compass, a shopkeeper chalking tomorrow's prices with the modest hope that he will erase them by noon. Craft also prays. A weaver counts warp threads as if reciting a litany. A potter draws the line that makes a vessel honest. The clay turns in the hand's weather until it remembers its purpose. The result is not luxury, but used prolonged into beauty. These are the artifacts that survive war's forgetfulness, because people refuse to forget how to need them. When night gathers, the hilltop church becomes a small lighthouse for thoughts. A shepherd pauses under it and decides to forgive a debt, not because he must, but because the bell's tone slid something heavy off his ribs. Down in the city, a choir finishes an old song that has learned new winters. The silence that follows does not feel empty. It feels like a table left set for someone who will be home soon. What, then, does stone remember? Hands, mostly. The pressure and release. The skill that becomes humility when faced with time. And what does song hold? The spaces between notes where people keep one another from falling. Within these, a nation sleeps and wakes, and sleeps again, carrying forward a calm that, like faith, does not insist on being noticed to be real. History, like the mountains, demands balance. In Georgia, crowns were never light ornaments. They were anchors tied to storms. A king did not rule only people. He ruled valleys that could betray him with famine, passes that invited invaders, and neighbors who watched the borders as wolves watch fences. To be a monarch here was not to sit in ease, but to walk a rope stretched between empires, with the wind of ambition blowing hard from every direction. Imagine Kutaisi on a morning of state. The king rises not to trumpets but to ordinary sounds, the bark of a dog, the creak of a well's rope, the hiss of bread against hot clay. He eats honey spread on flatbread, drinks wine diluted with water, and steps into the hall where nobles gather. There, grievances arrive in a line. A farmer complains of raiders. A merchant pleads for fair tolls. A monk requests permission to copy a sacred manuscript. The king listens. He cannot please all, but he must anger none beyond repair. So he practices the politics of compromise, a softer weapon, but one that endures longer than steel. Georgia's rulers understood that land is easier to win than to keep. A battle could shift a frontier for a season, but laws and marriages set stones that lasted. Coins were minted with crosses and lions, symbols meant to outlive dust. Charters were signed not just with ink, but with oaths before icons, binding the hand to the soul. Daughters married into neighboring courts. Sons led armies into neighboring valleys. Each child a thread in a tapestry that hoped to resist tearing. Sometimes the fabric held, sometimes it frayed, yet the weaving never stopped. For in weaving itself lay survival. And yet, crowns glittered with danger. Court intrigue was constant, a murmur like wind under doors. Nobles measured their power in whispers. Poets sharpened words like knives. Priests reminded kings that their crowns were dust before eternity. A ruler who forgot humility found enemies multiplying like weeds. A ruler who forgot strength invited contempt. Balance. Again. Always balance. On campaign. Georgian cavalry thundered across fields with banners that looked like falling stars, white crosses against red. Their sabers curved like rivers, designed to cut swiftly and retreat swiftly. Victories came Shamkor, Basian, battles that sent enemies staggering. But wise kings knew the peril of victory. It tempts pride, and pride tempts ruin. So they hurried back from triumphs to tend to walls and vineyards, to remind their people that bread, not glory, was the true measure of rule. Yet the kings were men, not myths. In cloisters they whispered confessions, pressing their foreheads against cool stone. In gardens they laughed at simple riddles. Some ruled harshly, some gently. But each learned that a throne was less a seat of power than a seat of questions: how much to give, how much to take, when to stand, when to yield. Their greatest rival was not the neighbor's army, but their own people's forgetfulness. If roads broke, if taxes crushed, if bread failed, the people would forget their king's name before his body cooled. One evening, in a stone hall, a king receives both gift and warning. The gift, a silver bowl from a distant ally, hammered with patterns of vines. The warning, a letter reporting movement across the border. He holds both in his hands, the bowl heavy with beauty, the letter heavy with dread. Which will shape tomorrow, the feast or the march? His decision, written in silence, will ripple through villages where mothers wait for grain prices, where shepherds wait for pasture rights, where masons wait for coin to repair walls. Crown and compromise, always twinned. Outside, in the city, people live the politics in miniature. Bakers adjust loaves to fit rising costs. Traders measure weights with a practiced fairness that keeps tempers cool. Children chant rhymes that mention kings as casually as rain, sometimes praising, sometimes mocking. A ruler who walks through his market hears in those rhymes his true report card. The mountains listen, too, though they keep their judgment for centuries rather than years. Georgia's monarchs were rarely conquerors in the style of Alexander. They were gardeners of survival, tending soil between storms. Their crowns did not shine with excess, but with responsibility, polished by the friction of compromise. And if history remembers their names unevenly, the people remembered them in more durable ways, in the bridges they crossed without fear, in the markets where scales tipped true, in the churches where bells continued to sing. Balance, that was the crown's true metal. Kings came and went, but the art of compromise endured, a quiet throne upon which the nation still rests. Every blessing carries its shadow. Georgia's gift of geography, the crossroads between Black Sea and Caspian, between Europe and Asia, was also its burden. Roads that carried silk, salt, and stories could just as easily carry armies. Kingdoms that thrived under sunlight one year found themselves bracing for siege the next. A Georgian child grew up learning that behind every caravan's bell might echo another bell. Heavier, sharper the clang of armor. Picture a quiet valley at dusk. Sheep fold into stone pens. A mother hums while stitching. Bread cools on a windowsill. The air smells of mint tea and wood smoke. Suddenly, faintly, hooves, not the measured steps of local herdsmen, but the rolling thunder of strangers. Dogs prick their ears. A shepherd stills his pipe. By dawn, foreign banners rise at the mountain pass, their colors unfamiliar to this soil. The lesson is clear: peace is temporary, vigilance permanent. The Byzantines knocked first, sometimes with gold, sometimes with swords. Persians, too, pressed from the south, promising order if tribute was paid. Later came the Seljuks, sharp as a desert wind, then the Mongols, whose storm swallowed horizons whole, then Ottomans and Persians again, playing tug-of-war with Georgian valleys. Each empire claimed destiny, yet each left footprints that mingled with Georgian endurance. The response was rarely blind defiance. Instead, Georgia learned a subtler art bend without breaking. Villages paid taxes yet still sang in their tongue. Churches lowered their bells' voices but did not silence them. Kings signed treaties inked with weary hands, buying time the way farmers buy seed, hoping tomorrow would honor the investment. This resilience was less dramatic than victory, but more enduring. Survival itself became a form of quiet triumph. And yet, patience has limits. There were nights when villages lit beacons on hilltops, calling riders to arms. Fortresses bristled, peasants gripped axes meant for wood. Polyphonic chants gave way to battle cries, rising like a storm against the dark. Victories came, but they carried grief in equal measure. A win at one pass might mean ruin in another valley. Mothers washed wounds with salt tears, and monks wrote chronicles where each page was shadowed by the smell of smoke. The Mongols struck hardest, their armies like a climate from another world. Submission was demanded, and Georgia bent, tribute flowed out, exhaustion seeped in. But beneath the yoke, culture hid in stubborn places. Monasteries buried manuscripts in walls. Singers carried history in throats when parchment was unsafe, even under foreign rule. Villagers planted vines, baked bread, told children the names of mountains. This quiet defiance preserved the nation when crowns grew brittle. Imagine a monk in a candlelit scriptorium, his quill scratches across parchment. Each letter, a small act of survival. Outside, thunder grows not from clouds, but from hooves, countless and relentless. The ink trembles. He pauses, listening, then he dips his pen again and writes a line that later generations will never forget. They have come, Who are they this time? Seljuks, Mongols, Persians, or yet another empire convinced that Georgia is only a prize? Not a home. The monk does not know. He writes anyway, because to stop would be to surrender. This is the cliffhanger, written into Georgian history, the sound of approach. Always. The sound of approach. Will the kingdom bend? Or will it resist? Will the valley survive? Or will it burn? The answer changes with each century. Yet the rhythm remains knock, resist, endure, rebuild. And in that rhythm lies Georgia's secret strength, while empires come and go. The land waits. The songs wait. The people wait. Waiting is its own form of victory, so the candle burns low. The monk lifts his head once more as the rumble grows nearer. He cannot yet see the riders, but he knows the script he is copying will outlive them. Empires knock. Georgia answers. And always. Somehow, Georgia remains. Empires knock. And sometimes the door is forced open. Georgia learned this in centuries when banners changed faster than seasons, and valleys that once sang polyphony echoed with the harsh syllables of conquerors. The Mongols did not just pass, they stayed, layering tribute on tribute, turning harvests into taxes, turning kings into vassals. For a while, Georgia seemed less a kingdom than a page in someone else's ledger. Picture a market under foreign watch. The scales are the same. The bread still round and warm. But the coin bears another face. Soldiers patrol. Their armor unfamiliar. A child tugs his mother's sleeve and whispers a question she cannot answer. Why are their prayers different from ours? The mother hushes him. But the silence she offers is heavier than any reply. Daily life continues because it must, but each act carries a shadow. To plant a vine is to risk it being seized. To teach a child the alphabet is to risk a suspicion. And yet people plant. People teach. Because to stop would be to vanish. The kingdom fractured. Nobles, once bound to a crown, began guarding only their own valleys. Fortresses became islands of power, suspicious of neighbors, loyal only to survival. Kings ruled in name, but their voices thinned against the roar of empire. Civil wars tore further at the fabric. Brothers fought brothers for thrones already fraying, and the land paid the cost in burned villages and widowed songs. And yet, even in ashes, echoes remained. Monasteries on high slopes refused to close their doors. Monks lit candles and copied scriptures, their ink strokes thin but unbroken. In hidden valleys, farmers whispered old proverbs. The tree bends in the wind, but its root clings. At weddings, singers wove polyphony low enough to pass for prayer, high enough to keep memory alive. In exile, merchants carried Georgian wine across seas, telling stories of mountains that still guarded their people. Identity did not die, it hibernated. Nature conspired with endurance. The Caucasus Mountains, indifferent to empire, offered refuge. Raiders could scorch plains, but deep gorges swallowed fugitives whole. Snow-closed passes faster than invaders expected, stranding them like ants on a frozen table. Rivers kept flowing, carrying trout and reeds for baskets, stubbornly repeating their seasons as if to remind humans that cycles outlast storms. A people who live beside mountains learn this lesson: no empire, however vast, can command the snowmelt. There were, of course, small flickers of revolt. A prince gathered men by torchlight, and for one night a valley roared with defiance. The next morning, the empire struck back harder. But even defeat taught a lesson. Courage could not always win, but it could always remember, and memory, unlike victory, is hard to erase. Meanwhile, faith became not just belief, but resistance. In candlelit chapels, prayers were whispered, not for conquest, but for preservation. Icons gazed down through soot, their colors dulled, yet still watchful. Women crossed themselves before baking, before traveling, before letting children sleep. The act was simple, but in simplicity lay rebellion. We are still here. We still bless. We still belong. The economy, too, adapted. Caravans slowed, but barter thrived. Wool for salt, cheese for oil, labor for grain. These exchanges, quiet and unrecorded, built webs of survival stronger than decrees. Markets shrank but did not vanish. A loaf of bread sold in a hidden corner meant that tomorrow could look just a little like today. Continuity, even in miniature, is a form of victory. Listen to the echoes, a shepherd teaching his son the ancient tune of a reed flute, even though soldiers forbid gatherings. A grandmother telling a bedtime story about Queen Tamar, her voice soft, but her eyes bright, as if daring the night to disagree. A mason carving a tiny cross under the eaves of a new house, invisible to officials, but visible to God. These are not grand histories, but small fidelities, and they are the marrow of endurance. And then, faintly, after generations of shadow, there comes a change in the air. Empires weaken, rivals tug at their edges, tribute collectors stop arriving as often. A rumor travels like birdsong. Perhaps the land will breathe again. Hope is fragile, but even fragile hope can crack stone. Georgia, scarred and weary, begins to stir. The chapter ends here, in the twilight between despair and rebirth. The land lies quiet, but beneath the quiet runs a current. Ashes cool, echoes gather. Something waits to rise again. History, like soil, remembers. Even when burned, it holds nutrients for another season. Georgia, after centuries of fracture and foreign yoke, began to stir again. Ashes cooled, and in the cracks of ruined fortresses, weeds pushed through green banners that whispered, "Life is not finished here." This rebirth was not sudden, not the lightning of one great victory, but the slow dawn that steals across mountains after a long night. Picture Tbilisi in such a dawn. Streets once patrolled by foreign soldiers now echo with merchants arranging stalls. Carpets hang, not as spoils but as goods to be bargained. Loaves appear on boards with the confidence of ordinary days. The smell of roasted walnuts drifts above roofs patched too many times, yet still intact. People do not speak of freedom in speeches, they speak of it in bread, in greetings, in the way shutters open without hesitation. Rebirth is rarely dramatic. It is the return of habits that had been threatened. Kings, though weaker than Tamar's line, began to find firmer footing. Authority was no longer absolute, Nobles guarded their valleys jealously. Yet, out of necessity, compromises formed. Rival lords learned that feuding only invited another empire's shadow, so they gathered in halls with soot-darkened frescoes, arguing by candlelight until exhaustion produced agreement. Unity, fragile as it was, offered shelter. Georgia was not yet whole, but it was less broken. Churches, scarred but standing, became schools again. Children leaned over wax tablets, scratching alphabets that curved like vines. To learn letters was to reclaim inheritance, Mukedruli script, soft and flowing, whispered, "We are still ourselves." Monasteries expanded their scriptoria. New manuscripts did not rival the great works of golden ages, but each page copied was another seed sown into the future. The simple act of ink on parchment was both survival and hope. Music, too, found its voice again. Polyphony, once sung in whispers, now swelled louder in courtyards. 3 voices rose, testing space, daring the walls to carry them. A bass hummed like earth, a middle voice weaving like rivers, a treble skimming like swallows. Together they proclaimed what politics could not. The people were still here, harmonizing, balancing, refusing silence. Markets revived, stitched by caravans returning from Black Sea ports. Traders spoke Armenian, Persian, Greek, but Georgian again joined the chorus. Salt, wine, wool, and stories passed hands. Coins clinked, scales tipped. Bargains were sealed with nods. Prosperity was modest. But prosperity need not be grand to be healing. Each full basket, each repaired roof, was a stone laid in the wall of rebirth. Nature gave its share. Vines rerouted in terraces, abandoned during wars. Orchards blossomed again along riverbanks. Sheep multiplied in high meadows, their bells once more part of evening's music. Seasons, indifferent to conquest, repeated their rhythms until people trusted them again. Trust is the foundation of recovery. Trust that spring will follow winter, that planting will yield harvest, that tomorrow will resemble today. Yet rebirth was not without shadows. Empires still circled, and the memory of invasions lay heavy. Tribute collectors might return, armies might cross passes again. Georgia could not escape geography, but it could learn from the past. Its people had grown practiced in resilience, flexible, stubborn, wise. When power faltered, communities held each other up. When rulers failed, families kept promises alive at hearths. The rebirth was less about crowns and more about roots. One evening, a grandmother sits in a courtyard, children around her knees. She tells of Queen Tamar, her voice slow, her words embroidered with sighs. The children lean closer, eyes wide. For them, Tamar is not history, but possibility. To remember her reign is to imagine that such order, such radiance, could return. Memory becomes prophecy. Seeds sprout not only in soil but in stories. Rebirth also brought art. Weavers dyed threads with madder root and indigo, producing patterns like mountains seen through rain. Potters shaped vessels whose curves remembered ancient forms but whose glazes hinted at new experiments. Painters retouched frescoes, layering hope upon ruin. Beauty, fragile yet insistent, returned as both ornament and armor. And so, Georgia, though still pressed by greater powers, began to stand straighter. Its strength was not in armies alone, but in the quiet accumulation of ordinary resilience, a book copied, a vine pruned, a loaf baked, a song lifted. Each act was small. Together, they made a chorus. The mountains watched, as they always had, measuring not victories but persistence. They had seen kingdoms rise and fall. Yet here again they saw life gather. Smoke curled from chimneys. Bells swung in towers. Alphabets danced across parchment. Rebirth was not dramatic, but it was real. And in that reality lay the promise that Georgia, though scarred, would never vanish. Rebirth is rarely gentle. As Georgia found its footing again, new tides pressed in from every horizon. The land stood between two great currents, the cross of Christendom and the crescent of Islam. Each carried faith, law, and empire. Each demanded loyalty. Georgia's valleys became both frontier and meeting ground, a threshold where belief and politics tangled like vines. Picture a church bell echoing at dawn. Its chime rolls over vineyards, mixing with birdsong. Not far away, from a trader's tent, the call to prayer drifts upward, carried by wind along the river. For a moment, both sounds hover in the same sky, neither silencing the other. This is Georgia's condition to live in the overlap, to negotiate between worlds without losing its own. Kings walked a narrow ridge. To the west, alliances with Christian kingdoms promised aid but demanded deference. To the south and east, Islamic empires offered trade and tolerance in exchange for tribute. One misstep could mean invasion, so rulers learned diplomacy as survival, signing treaties with one hand, blessing churches with the other, and ensuring that their people could farm, sing, and pray in relative peace. Balance became more valuable than conquest. The people absorbed this duality into daily life. In markets, Armenian, Persian, and Arabic mixed with Georgian tongues. A rug woven in Tbilisi might carry a cross in one corner, a geometric motif from Islamic art in another, beauty without borders. Merchants learned to greet customers in whichever language opened the purse most quickly. Children grew up hearing multiple prayers, and while loyalty remained to their own faith, curiosity softened the edges of difference. Yet tension simmered. A village might see its church taxed or its bells silenced under Islamic governors. A mosque might rise near an old basilica, and some muttered about encroachment. Identity felt fragile, tested with every shift in power. Still, the mountains taught patience. Empires pass, but vineyards root. Elders reminded, so families lit candles quietly, baked bread in shapes that symbolized eternity, and taught children hymns after dark. Faith was not surrendered, it was carried like a hidden talisman. Cultural resilience thrived in art. Frescoes showed saints with eyes wide, not in fear, but endurance. In monasteries, scribes copied not only scripture, but also chronicles that recorded trials. Their ink testified, "We bent, but we did not break." At the same time, craftsmen borrowed motifs from neighbors. Stone arches gained new flourishes. Textiles adopted foreign dyes. Georgia's culture absorbed without dissolving. Like a river that takes tributaries yet keeps its name. Consider one autumn evening. A caravan halts outside Tbilisi. The camp glows with lamps, spices scent the air. A Georgian priest blesses travelers, while a Muslim scholar opens a scroll. They eat bread together, dipping into the same stew. The moment is fragile but real coexistence, not by decree but by habit. Such moments, repeated, gave Georgia resilience deeper than politics. But dangers remained. When empires fought Ottomans against Persians, crusaders against caliphates, Georgia often lay in the path. Armies crossed valleys not for Georgia's sake but for their own ambitions, leaving ashes in their wake. Villagers rebuilt again and again, weary but stubborn. Each reconstruction was slower, yet each whispered the same vow: we will remain. Women carried much of this endurance. While kings debated alliances, mothers taught prayers, kept recipes, and passed on proverbs. The guest is from God, they said, even when the guest came armored. Hospitality became both shield and statement: we may bend, but we will not forget kindness. Around hearths. Stories of Tamar and earlier kings reminded children that greatness was part of their inheritance. Memory was armor. In this crucible of cross and crescent, Georgia shaped a unique identity. It did not reject the world around it, but refused to dissolve into it. Faith anchored the people, art expressed their resilience, geography kept testing them. The result was not purity, but endurance. Georgia remained Georgian Christian at heart, but seasoned by centuries of dialogue and struggle with Islam. And here is the paradox: the very pressure that threatened to erase the nation instead deepened its roots. A tree, buffeted by wind, learns to clutch the soil tighter. Georgia, caught between empires, learned to define itself not by victory but by survival. Not by isolation, but by the ability to remain distinct while touching many worlds. As night falls, bells and calls to prayer once again share the same sky. Their mingled echoes drift across fields where vines grow heavy, where shepherds sing ancient polyphony. Above them, the Caucasus loom, indifferent yet protective. Between cross and crescent, Georgia endures, not as a prize to be divided, but as a home too stubborn to abandon its soul. Every story has a dusk before another dawn. For Georgia, the centuries that drew closer to the modern age were both weary and luminous. The land had bent under so many banners: Byzantine, Persian, Mongol, Ottoman, Russian, yet it remained itself, like a flame cupped by patient hands. The vigil before tomorrow was long, but in that waiting, Georgia shaped the memory it would carry forward. Picture a village on a winter night. Snow presses against roofs. Smoke curls upward like threads, stitching heaven and earth. Inside a stone house. 3 generations sit around a hearth. The grandmother recites a psalm. The father mends a plough. Children trace letters in ash with sticks. Beyond their door, empires quarrel and armies march. But inside, the rhythm of life is stubborn. This rhythm is Georgia's strongest wall. Kings still ruled. Though their power waned, palaces bore more negotiation than command. Some rulers leaned toward Russia for protection. Others looked south toward Ottoman power. Each choice carried risk. For alliances that promised safety often demanded sovereignty in return. Georgia, like a tightrope walker, moved step by careful step, balancing survival with dignity. The crown became less a symbol of domination than of representation, a fragile thread tying valleys together. The people, however, carried continuity more faithfully than courts. Farmers pressed vines into terraces even after raids. Shepherds led flocks across passes their ancestors had crossed. Merchants kept markets alive, selling wine, wool, and stories in equal measure. Monks guarded libraries, copying old texts even when newer rulers dismissed them as useless. Continuity was resistance. To keep planting, to keep teaching, to keep singing, that was Georgia's rebellion. Faith endured as both solace and identity. Churches, some scarred by cannon fire, rang their bells again. Frescoes restored with trembling hands once more gazed down on worshippers. Icons kissed by centuries of lips gleamed faintly in lamplight. Pilgrims continued to walk mountain paths toward monasteries that looked out over valleys wide as hope. Religion was not only belief, it was the lifeline binding a people across centuries of upheaval. Cultural life bloomed even in hardship. Polyphonic choirs swelled in villages, their voices layered like the mountains themselves. Songs mourned the dead, yet also celebrated the living. Poems told of heroes and martyrs, but also of vineyards and rivers. Painters mixed pigments from soil and stone, crafting saints who looked not distant, but familiar faces that resembled neighbors, uncles, mothers. Georgian identity was not abstract, it was incarnate in daily life, yet shadows lengthened. The Ottoman crescent pressed from the west, the Persian sphere from the south, and the Russian Empire loomed from the north. Each saw Georgia not as a home but as a prize. Villages knew the weight of tribute and the price of betrayal. Families, sometimes scattered, seeking refuge in mountains or distant lands. Exile became another thread in the national fabric. To be Georgian meant to carry home inside, even if far from its soil. Still, even under encroachment, the seeds of modern Georgia sprouted. Schools taught children not only scripture but arithmetic. Printers began to replace scribes, spreading words faster than armies could silence them. Roads widened, trade adapted, and a sense of nation larger than valley, larger than kingdom, grew stronger. Empires could dominate territory, but identity hardened into something portable, indestructible. Imagine, now, Tbilisi at twilight in the 18th century. Oil lamps glow along narrow streets. Merchants haggle. Priests chant. Scholars debate in hidden rooms. A child runs barefoot across a courtyard, chasing a hoop. Laughter ringing despite rumors of war. Overhead, the fortress walls catch the last light of sunset. Scarred but unbroken, the city, like the nation, is weary yet awake. Georgia's vigil was not passive. It was a discipline of endurance. Each family that rebuilt a house, each singer who remembered a verse, each monk who copied a line, they all kept the candle burning against the dark. Empires might claim maps, but the people claimed memory, and memory carried faithfully, became prophecy, a tomorrow where Georgia would stand once more in its own name. This chapter does not close with conquest or defeat. It closes with continuity small, stubborn acts that stitched survival into future strength. The vigil was long, but dawn always comes. Georgia waited, prayed, planted, sang, and in waiting, it prepared. Tonight, our journey rests. But the story of Georgia does not. From the first shepherds who carved paths along the ridges, to Queen Tamar, who ruled with light, to villagers who sang even under the shadow of empire, the land has kept one promise we endure. Empires knocked, borders shifted, crowns cracked, yet Georgia remained, like a mountain refusing to bow, like a river that forgets nothing as it moves. Think back to where we began, the Caucasus rising like a wall, vineyards threading their green fingers along valleys, church bells climbing silver air. These images have accompanied us through centuries, through feasts and wars, through ashes and rebirths. And now, at the edge of sleep, they return, unchanged. The mountains are still there, the rivers still murmur, the bells still swing. In the quiet of night, you might hear the polyphony again, 3 voices, one deep as earth, one weaving like rivers, one floating like swallows. They do not demand your attention, they cradle it. This is the sound of survival turned into beauty, of pain shaped into harmony. It is also the sound of rest, the lullaby of a people who never stopped believing in tomorrow. Children still learn the alphabet with its graceful curves, each letter a vine curling toward light. Farmers still press grapes into cuvevri jars, trusting time to transform sweetness into something stronger. Monks still light candles before icons whose paint has thinned but whose gaze has not. These acts are ordinary, but in them lies Georgia's secret history is not only written in chronicles, it is whispered into daily life. And so, as your eyes grow heavy, let the story settle around you like a blanket. Imagine the river Mount Kvari gliding past Tbilisi's bridges, carrying reflections of lamps and moon. Imagine snow resting on Svan towers, their stone shoulders strong against time. Imagine a grandmother's voice weaving Tamar's name into bedtime tales, promising that light returns after shadow. The vigil is over. The river still flows. The mountains still keep watch. Georgia endures, and so, gently, will your dreams tonight. Good night. Sleep well. Tomorrow, another civilization waits for us to wander its roads together.